Good afternoon, as most of you know, in KSRA land, if you will, that the session for the legislature is wrapped up this year and is actually a record time, I believe, J.R., that it has. And they had a compressed session, and so it was out in how many days did it take?
I think 72, which predates my birth, beating that amount of days.
Predates mine as well. So that's great. Saved over $1 million for the state, so that was a good thing. But the purpose for our interview today is to discuss House Bill 2502, which was the mega gun bill. We've had a lot of discussion on our pages, and I know a lot of people want to know what's the truth of here and there and these things. What can I do? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I know that you had some input early on in the session with the House Bill 2440, and it was kind of some of that language was actually mixed in with through Senate Bill 65 and 66 being put into. Maybe why don't you tell people how we got to 2502? They're probably wondering how in the world did we get from 65 to 2044, all these numbers, to 2502.
Sure, yeah. So through the legislative process, of course, it takes the House and the Senate agreeing on the exact same language. And on some bills, it just takes a while to get there until you're at the end of the session. So what happened with 2502 is essentially we go through the process on multiple bills. They are heard in one chamber and the other. And then maybe they're passed in one chamber and not the other. But what we want to do is put them all together into a single bill so we can vote it up or down as a conference committee report, which is essentially you take that House Bill 2502 and you're just concurring on both sides for the same stuff. That way we're not taking 5 votes at the end of the session when we've already voted on these things before. And House Bill 2440, that was one of those bills that really didn't have much opposition at all, or any really. It was supported by KSRA. It was supported by the League of Kansas Municipalities. So you could go through the list of different organizations, and there wasn't a single opponent to the bill. So it was universally one of those things that I think everybody was in favor of and would vote for on its own. Once we compiled it together with some other things, there were some objections to other parts by different organizations, but in the end, we came up with a really good bill that accomplished a lot within that single bill, HB 2502.
Now, specifically, what was 2440, your bill? What was that addressing, and how did that work its language into 2502?
Sure. So any bill, when you're doing something like this, you kind of have to predict human behavior a little bit, or organizational behavior, I guess. And so what we were running up against is that many of our courthouses are actually within a larger building that also contains other offices. So like in Salina, we have a city-county building that has the courthouses in it. The third floor is the courthouses. The first 2 floors are city and county offices. So the county commission wanted to be able to have as much concealed carry as they could, so they wanted the first and second floor to be able to be concealed carry while continuing the security through a single entrance on the third floor for the courtrooms, which is what the judges wanted. And understandably so. You have situations where someone might be having their kids taken away. There are some circumstances, I think, where you probably want to make sure that people are not armed, and that's one of them. So we wanted to make sure that that third floor could be secured still. The decision that was before us under the previous law, without this change, would have been secure the entire building or secure none of it. Well, if we secure the entire building, then that reduces our Second Amendment rights. That reduces our ability to conceal carry. So what we wanted to do was allow for a portion of a building to be secured while the other portions are not and are concealed carry allowed. And that's one of many instances. At K-State Polytechnic, we have an aviation building and an aviation school, and that's on the apron for the Salina Airport. We need to secure that door. So we would have to then secure the entire building, which doesn't increase our rights, it reduces them. So what we wanted to do was be able to have concealed carry up to the point of that door where you're going onto the apron, which the TSA, of course, would require for the Salina Airport. So those kind of things are what we were trying to solve. We were trying to kind of predict behavior and yet at the same time increase our Second Amendment rights by having as much of these buildings open to concealed carry as possible.
Now, as far as, for instance, somebody works in, let's say, at the State House or a state building in Topeka, where's that set at right now? I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure.
Where's that set right now?
Sure, you can conceal carry in the Capitol in those buildings. It's there is security at the front, and there are metal detectors at the front. So there is a process by which you would declare that you have that weapon. But other than that, the buildings, the state buildings that aren't the Capitol, do not have that metal detector. Not a big fan of the metal detector. I've been in other state houses where you can walk in unaccosted, and I think that's probably a better way to do it, and would prefer that our own state house operated that way. But at this time, we do have metal detectors and that bottleneck getting into the building.
Okay. So now under 2502, I mean, of course, this isn't law yet, and it has to go, the governor has to sign this bill still.
Yeah.
Under 2502, if, say, for instance, a person works in a courthouse in a county in the state, and maybe they work for, let's say, for instance, the clerk's office, for God only knows, you know, for either the county clerk or for a district court judge. How's that going to affect their life?
Well, I think, you know, under 2440, which is now in 2502, there isn't a huge difference in the way that that would operate. And of course, right now we're under the exemption with our, at least our county building was granted one of the exemptions, which was unfortunate that we went down that path. But I think I understand, you know, the reasoning and the rationale was simply that they wanted to continue to have those courtrooms secured. And I can understand that. I mean, I'd prefer that we all be able to have, you know, the opportunity to protect ourselves. But if they're going to provide adequate security measures, if they're going to do metal detectors, okay, I can understand that. And that's one of the things that we allowed for in the law. But basically in Salina, just as an example, nothing will change, because when the governor does sign this law, and I believe he will, because it has many pro-Second Amendment pieces to it, when that happens, then what we're doing today will just simply continue. We secure the third floor. We have the other two floors available with concealed carry, and they'll just take the stickers off the door in 2017 when the exemption ends.
Okay.
But as far as there are a couple other pieces like the Wichita Fast Pass in there. I think you probably have somebody else coming on to talk more detail about that, because I wasn't following that one as fully, not being on that committee. But then also you have public employees who will now be able to carry on the job outside of those buildings. So they would have the opportunity to protect themselves when they're out there. So if you have an individual who's working in a job that requires them to be out and about in the city in a vehicle or what have you, they would be able to carry in those instances, with the exception of, and this was an amendment later on, with the exception of school bus drivers and teachers on field trips, which I think, again, puts us in that position where we have decided for some reason as a society that kids need to be soft targets at all times. And I think the criminals know that, that we will continue to demand, evidently, that that our kids are the most vulnerable targets without anyone there to protect them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and of course we voiced our disagreement with that amendment that was added, and I'll be discussing that actually later on with Senator Knox, hopefully, and he'll be able to explain some more of that to us.
Sure.
But,
well, add me to the list of people who disagree with that particular amendment and disagree fully with the disarming of folks who would be in a position to protect our kids.
Absolutely. And now, as far as a person in those buildings, those state and municipal owned buildings, maybe we need to define that too. What is a state municipal? Is it the county? If the county owns a building,
Yeah.
does that mean A
Yeah.
municipal building?
Yeah, so you're talking about, in Salina, the city owns our arena, the Bicentennial Center. So that is a municipal building. So it would be any type of building, not just office buildings, the sheriff's department, places like that.
Very
Those are
good.
all under the law. So yeah,
And they have to be, by 2017, they have
yeah,
to, by the law, have adequate security measures, which are defined within the law as
mhm,
being a metal detector and a person there, a security officer there on site
right,
to man that and to deal with that situation. And that would include any number of those buildings, whether they be, any structure that would be owned by the county, city, or state. Is that the right understanding?
yeah, that's right, that's right. So it would be any of those buildings, and it would extend to places like those public venues that are city owned or county owned.
Now that we are constitutional carry too,
Hmm.
that may be a question folks would have. Well, I don't have a CCL. What about
Right.
me? I
Yeah.
mean,
So
can
I
I
guess
just
I
go
guess
ahead?
we're using concealed carry just a little more broadly as the
Right.
act of simply carrying concealed rather than under the statute. So yeah, you're right. So constitutionally carrying concealed, you would not need to have that license or permit or whatever we're calling it. I guess it's a license um, to carry in those buildings. No, you would not need that. You do need it though for the school. So if you're within 1,000 feet of a school, which I mean, it's a bizarre
Right.
little hitch in the law because of the way that the feds set this up. So if you're constitutionally carrying, you're still under the limits of distance from a school, as opposed to if you have the license, then you're no longer subject to the limit, but of course you're still subject to the ban on concealed weapons or any weapons inside the school. So that's a little bit of a situation that I think everyone does need to be aware of, that if you're within that 1,000-foot limit, you may be violating the law if you're simply constitutionally carrying under our state statute as opposed to having the concealed carry license.
Right. And that's something very important, and we've tried to emphasize. And of course, we deal with through trainmekansas.com or trainmeks.com. You can also link up with our Facebook page for Train Me Kansas to always get good information there, or just our main page, or get on Kansas gun laws and legislation page, and folks can get the information like that. For instance, that we want folks to be aware of. Last year, it was good to know that last year, that gentleman that was in Topeka at the academy while it was being robbed, 3 weeks after Governor Brownback had signed into law constitutional carry, he was able to interrupt, not thwart completely, but interrupt an armed robbery, and
Yeah.
he was constitutionally carrying his weapon or his firearm. So it just was a you know proved
Yeah.
the point all the
And
more.
and he got those guys to drop the guns before they hopped in the car and left. So, I mean, there's
Yeah.
something to be said for keeping those weapons out of the hands of actual criminals, because we allow for those who are not criminals to carry and to intervene in these situations. And I think that we all have that right to protect ourselves, and that's something that we need to continue to expand in Kansas and have. I mean, if you look back, we were one of the last states to have concealed carry passed, and yet we're one of the
Mhm.
first to have constitutional carry. And I think that speaks to the leadership, that speaks to the priorities that we have under now having Republicans in control of the legislature and the administrative offices, and also the governor's mansion and all of our statewide electeds. It's a sea change from what we've been doing in the past, which was really being restrictive on gun rights.
One of the things that kind of segues into is people say, well, more guns. You guys all are that's all you want. Just more guns everywhere. Guns, guns, guns. And I know that was brought up on the floor of the Senate. Was also brought up on the floor of the House several times this year. And what's your response to that? I know you're in the Salina area, and it's a decently, I mean, a very growing, much a growing community, and
Sure.
um, people and may be like, well, we don't need all these guns everywhere. And what's your response to that?
Well, the criminals always have guns. They're criminals. They're not going to follow our laws.
Absolutely.
They're not looking at the signs and saying, "Oh
Yeah.
gosh, I can't carry in this building, so I'm not going to." They're the ones who will anyway. So what we want to do is be less restrictive on the law-abiding citizens, so they have the opportunity to protect themselves from the criminals. And the criminals, of course, will do what they've always been doing, being criminals. So I think the rationale here is that somehow you're protecting people by saying you can't carry guns in here, when in fact it's probably more of a deterrent to crime that criminals understand that others may be armed. And in the academy sports situation, I think that just shows you the police can't be there in 20 seconds. The police response time is greater than that. And if you don't have that opportunity to protect yourself or to stop a crime in commission, where those people could have gotten a hold of multiple guns. I mean, you see it right there. That's exactly how they do it. They're stealing the weapons, they're getting access to those guns, and they're going to go commit crimes with them. They're going to sell them to other criminals who will commit crimes with them. And we need to be able to fight back. And while I think it'd be great for law enforcement to be there every time, they simply can't be. And we have done a lot to address public safety in the state of Kansas. We have a recruitment and retention plan for our Kansas Highway Patrol to get us back up to 500 troopers. We have an increase in pay for our KBI agents so they can do backup for investigations in some parts of the state where we just don't have that kind of local presence of investigators. We've been doing a lot to emphasize that we want a high level of public safety in the state of Kansas, so people enjoy living here, working here, and raising their family here, and know that they're going to be safe.
Yeah. The we kind of backtrack here when we talk about restricted access areas, and that's going to be mentioned in coming interviews, I'm quite sure. But and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what does that mean? You talked about at the airport there. What does that mean, like in town, for instance? What's a restricted access entrance or area, for that matter?
Yeah, so I think what we need to make sure we can do is comply with some of the federal law and things like that, and we don't create scenarios where we're restricting more than we have to. And that's what the law previously did. Under the Attorney General's opinion, he basically said the way the law is written, it's either all or nothing. So if you have a 20-story building in Wichita and you have one area that you want to secure, let's say it's a courtroom, or let's say there's in a university, there are certain labs where they did not want firearms because they had sensitive things going on in there, and the discharge of a firearm, whether it was in defense or not, would be highly volatile. Nuclear reactor on the campus of Kansas State University. I mean, there are certain areas where even if you were in defense of yourself, that firearm going off could be cataclysmic for many. Those types of areas, we wanted them to be able to secure without securing the entirety of that building, without restricting our gun rights in the entirety of the building, when we could in fact go in and be a little more tactical about this and say, okay, this entrance. And some of those entrances are secured with key cards, essentially. Okay. And that will probably be talked about more with the Wichita Fast Pass thing, but right. We also have restricted entrances that are key card enabled. And I think that's another situation where you don't necessarily need to have security 24 hours a day. You can simply say, only these people have access to that area. So we're going to say you can't have guns in there, and here's the restricted access, and only these people can go in. But at the same time, the rest of the building can be available for concealed carry.
Very good.
Yep.
Are there any other maybe clarifications that you see that could be made so that people can be more aware that we're maybe missing thus far?
Well, I think when 2017 hits and we do start seeing some of these situations where most of the building is open, but there are these secure areas that people need to be aware, so that when they're going into the building, they're not being told to leave. But you do also need to know that you're not going to be arrested. No one should be threatening to arrest you or to do anything legal against you if you do end up carrying into a building and it turns out that a certain area, or you go into that area and you're not supposed to have a weapon there. The only thing they can do is ask you to leave. There is not a provision in there that says that if you walk in there with your gun, you're immediately arrested. You're immediately in violation of the law. you will simply be asked to go put your weapon back in your car or wherever it needs to go. But I think to avoid that, it makes more sense to be aware. So as this starts to happen, just be aware when you're going to a building, and especially probably courtrooms. I think most of the courtrooms across the state, they're going to do something to prevent weapons in those courtrooms. So just be aware of that, so that you're not going into a building and then finding out when you're going up to the third floor or whatever it is that suddenly you're not allowed to carry in that portion where you need to go. I think that'll get rid of 90% of the problems that people will face when it comes to having this law implemented, as opposed to being stopped at the door. You might go in and find out that there's a small area that you're not allowed to do that in.
Very good. Now, just to kind of again backtrack back into the legislative sausage making business, people get discouraged, honestly. They get discouraged, and there's in the country right now, I think we kind of see that discouragement of, well, these politicians do that, and these politicians do this, and they don't work, and they don't do this, and they don't do that. Just you've been a legislator for a little bit here now. From a day-to-day perspective, number one, what do you guys do? And number two, and that's year-round. And number two, when it comes down to legislation and sausage making, if you will, can you explain that it isn't just as easy as saying yes and no, but in fact there's some wrangling that goes on, and just give us those two pictures.
Government isn't set up to move really fast, so you don't see a lot of that. You do have a lot of input from all sides, and you want to come to conclusions that most people can be agreeable on. So we do spend a lot of time on things, and sometimes it's just a matter of wanting to put them all together into a single vote. So issues like 2502, putting them together in 5 bills in conference committee, getting agreement on all of those at once between each chamber, those kind of things. Sometimes it just makes sense to do it that way, rather than let's go talk about this one and every little detail of that one get figured out and move on to the next. That would actually take even longer. But yeah, we do go through a process. We try to have hearings on both sides, which would be in Fed and state on Second Amendment issues. We'll then have debate on the floor, sometimes on both sides, sometimes only on one side, and then they're able to conference those bills in. So we did have hearings on both HB 2440 and SB 65 on the House side, but neither of those bills actually were debated on the floor of the House. Instead, they were passed over in the Senate, and that gives us the opportunity to simply conference them into one large bill. What that also does is it prevents amendments on one side or the other. So if we understand that there are going to be more liberal amendments done to our bills, we might not have them on one side or the other where those amendments are coming from. And I know that when we were looking at 2440 running on the House floor, that there was a possibility that someone might implement a extension of the exemption or a permanent exemption for college campuses. Mm-hmm. And we didn't necessarily want to see that happen, and we were concerned that the votes might actually be there for it. So we avoided that by only having the Senate side pass it. So the rules sometimes can work in your favor, and there's some work done to fit within those rules and get accomplished what we can for the people we serve. And I think that sometimes it does take time, and sometimes we do it on the last day, and sometimes we do it on the last day at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with doing work to that hour of the night. I mean, I think we're actually not in a position during those times when we're being pushed that late. We're not the ones doing the bulk of the work. What's happening is the revisor's office has to take these statutes and write them all up with the amendments and the agreements that were done in conference and present them. And we have to have an opportunity to read them and actually understand what they're doing. And then we go into our caucus meetings and have them explain to us so that we understand what we're reading before we're voting on it. So all of that's done for a reason. I don't think necessarily that you have anyone on either side, whether Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. I don't think anyone's around there, just messing around and not doing their work. I think people are definitely doing their work. There just are sometimes delays that don't really have anything to do with us. But those revisors work hard. I mean, these are legal minds down there who are putting this legislation together. When we say we want something to accomplish X, they make that happen within the confines of the statute. We're not all attorneys. I'm not an attorney. We don't necessarily speak in legalese, but we have good people who can put those things together, and that's what they do. They end up going in and working on all of that stuff. So in defense of all my colleagues, regardless of their political stripe, we do go to work every day, and oftentimes that starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes that ends at 3 o'clock the next morning. So it isn't bricklaying, but it is sometimes exhausting to go through that process. There's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Yeah, and to address that, now WIBW Channel 13 out of Topeka released an article on their website, or well, not on their website. I don't know as of yet, but it was on Facebook. That, in fact, it was conjectured or in the article that this was done without any public comment or the opportunity for public comment.
Yeah, that's the media lying to you. That's an outright lie. So I testified on each one of these bills, and it was done at 9:30 in the morning on a Wednesday. There were dozens of pieces of testimony given on these issues. To say that no one had an opportunity for input is nonsense, absolute and utter nonsense. To say that these things are done in the dark of night, I mean, 9:30 on a Wednesday morning, that's not the dark of night, folks. This stuff's been talked about since January. Was the first time I testified on this, and many others, including the KSRA, who were there testifying and offering their input, as well as the League of Kansas Municipalities, the Kansas Counties Association, private citizens who were there offering their input. It was debated in committee, both on the Senate side and the House side. Like I said, it was heard on the House or on the Senate floor and was passed out in the Senate. And then, in fact, when we pass it, when we actually concur on that resolution to say this is it, we're passing the bill and sending it to the governor, there's yet another opportunity for debate. Even though we've already debated it multiple times, there was again an opportunity for debate. So to say that there's no input, I mean, that is just absolutely an utter falsehood. That's a lie. And the media likes to push these Democrat narratives where they say that all of these things are done in the dark of night. And in fact, on another unrelated bill last year, they said this. They said it was done in the dark of night, and it made it into the Wichita Eagle, and yet it was passed in the afternoon again on a weekday, and they simply ignore those facts, and they can't seem to reconcile the fact that we work during the day, and while some votes may be taken very late at night, eventually all of these issues have been vetted and have been discussed. It's not within our rules to just invent law in the middle of the night. These things have to have had hearings on both sides. They have to have passed out of at least one chamber. So you know that these things have at least been discussed through the political process, through the process of passing a law. So I would completely reject the idea that WIBW stuck out there, and I think you should be suspect of anything that they say from this point forward, that it isn't just simply Democrat parroted talking points.
And in fact, the House has a specific rule that was made because of a legislator who had driven home late at night and on his way home lost his life. And you all have a rule in the House that you cannot debate after midnight. Is that correct?
Right. We suspended that rule one time this session. But other than that, yes, we have a rule that the House adjourns at midnight.
So there is no
stops at midnight, I guess. I think the way we interpreted that rule is that you come back at 8 in the morning and you continue where you left off. It requires the Highway Patrol to sit in the chamber, unfortunately, if we're in the middle of an action.
So indeed, there's nothing being done in the dark of night.
Not really.
Other than, on a regular basis.
Maybe some debate on the floor on a resolution that's been vetted through a process since January. I mean, if you want to say that, then that's probably accurate. Yes, a final vote might have been taken in the middle of the night. Our budget votes were taken very late at night, but it's a budget that had gone through the appropriations process. It's a budget that went through the Senate side on Ways and Means. Those things have all been heard. There was plenty of opportunity to discuss and to talk about everything that was in there. And whether people chose to do that or not is completely up to them. But to say that there's something untoward going on just because we take a vote at that hour, the people who would have the opportunity to speak during the process if we did it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon are the exact same people who have that opportunity at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Private citizens don't come down to the House floor. So that's just kind of how it works.
Now, you represent the 69th district, and
Correct.
where is that? I know now it's primarily the Salina area, but what all counties?
So we have 3 representatives in Saline County. I am bound by the county, but I am the west side of Salina and northwest Saline County. So I don't escape Saline County with my district.
Okay. So Salina is your place.
Yep, born and raised.
Okay. Well, we've had a great discussion here for about a half hour, and I really appreciate your time, J.R.
Sure. Anytime.
And we are indebted to you. You're a servant of the state, and not only of Saline County, but also for us. I don't live in Saline County. I live in Pot County, or Pottawatomie County myself, and so. But we appreciate your service and what you're doing for Second Amendment issues and trying to give freedom and as well as give a balance too. I think that is good to be struck, and we want to be struck, that balance to be struck with the access areas and so on. But we thank you for standing up for the Second Amendment.
Absolutely. Anytime. Appreciate it.
But for those of you who have been watching, Representative J.R. Claeys from Saline County, 69th District, of course, was involved in the process of entirety, anyhow, of building 2502, House Bill 2502, the mega gun bill this year. Just wanted to get the truth out there to everybody. And if you have a question, maybe you have a question later on, and I'm quite sure JR would be open to answering those questions personally. Yep. As a legislator, and we are too, at Kansas Gun Laws and Legislation on it's a Facebook group. And then we have our main page, Kansas State Rifle Association, and then Train Me Kansas. Where we were on Instagram, Twitter. We're out trying to get the truth out there and trying to communicate with folks. So if you have a question and you watch this video and you're still sitting there scratching your head, make sure you ask. As a citizen, please ask and be involved and vote in November. We've got a constitutional amendment to our Kansas Constitution coming up for a vote in November on the ballot. That was actually it was authored by Adam Lusker, who is a Democrat, and then the former Representative Travis Couture-Lovelady, who actually is one of our board members, and then is the NRA ILA liaison for the state of Kansas now. And that passed through both houses and will be on the ballot in November. So people got to vote and get out there and be a part of the process and ask questions. So, JR, I appreciate so much you taking the time out today. I know you've had other things going on and stuff, and you got a life that you live and a job that you do, and just taking the time out to talk to us, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, Lyle. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to the members.
All right. Well, guys, we will be doing some further interviews, maybe up to 4 more interviews with different legislators. We do have tonight at 6 o'clock, or this evening, however you want to look at that, a conversation with Blake Carpenter about the BB gun, air gun portion of this 2502. And he'll be helping us out to understand that, and looking forward to that. And then Kevin Jones will be with us tomorrow evening at I think it's 8:30, discussing the military and active duty personnel portion of it as well. So, and I'm looking to get Forrest Knox, Senator from Wilson, or from I think it is Wilson, isn't it, JR?
That sounds right.
Get him on and get him to discuss, because he worked very hard on this bill in the Senate, I know, and for actual years. So, but stay tuned, and we'll talk to you later. And stay tuned to KSRA for good information and truthful information, not biased from the media, okay, about Second Amendment issues. Have a great afternoon, folks. We'll talk to you later.